This lesson is designed to introduce you to using graphing calculators. If you have a graphing calculator, I would suggest that you follow along in this presentation and enter the keystrokes that you see mentioned on your own calculator. As you go, jot down any questions you have or key things to remember. You don't need to take full-blown, top-notch notes on this. If you don't have a graphing calculator while you're watching this, go ahead and watch it, and if there are things that you're not sure about, do jot down any questions that you have. Then, when you're back in school, you can borrow one of the calculators we have to try out some of the things you see. Using graphing calculators can seem fairly intimidating, but really, it's a good thing. They can help you, they can do a lot of math for you, and they can check your work. So, let's look at some of the important keys. The first, along the top row of gray buttons, is the y equals button. This is where we're going to enter equations that we want to graph. Notice that this button is labeled y equals, which means we have to rearrange our equations to have them in function form, or have them where y is all by itself on one side of the equal sign. Next, when you want to actually graph those equations, on the right-hand side of your calculator, you'll see a button that says Graph. You can enter multiple equations, and you can graph multiple equations at the same time. You'll see a button that says Window in that row, and we're going to use this to adjust the view that we have of the coordinate axes. So it's like we have a window onto a coordinate plane, and we'll use that button to adjust how big and where that window is. Finally, a useful button. This is a button that has two functions, as most of these do. It has calc, which is in blue, and we're going to access that blue writing there, that calc, by clicking the second button on the calculator. That's the blue one in the top left-hand corner. And then the button beneath calc that says trace. What that's going to help us do is find specific coordinates along the lines or the functions that we graph. So let's look at how we actually enter equations. First, click on the y equals button. Now it's possible that your calculator already has some equations in there, and if it does, you can use the arrow keys to select those and the clear button to clear those out. Then, you're going to type in the equation that you want. So suppose you want to enter a linear equation like y equals 3x plus 12. You're going to type it in directly as 3x plus 12. So you would type 3 first, and then to enter x, you're going to use the button that's a mid-ish way on your calculator. It says xt, the Greek letter theta, and then n. You click that once to get an x, and then plus, and then 12, if you're entering 3x plus 12. If you want to enter another equation to graph at the same time, you can use the down arrow to move to where the next equation is. While we're looking at the screen, notice that there is a button on the far left-hand side of the calculator about halfway down that says x squared. That's going to take whatever you just entered and square it. So we're going to need that when we enter some different equations. So here are 3 different equations. Let's go ahead and enter these. The first one is 3x minus 12. So 3, and then hit that x button, and then subtract, and then 12. That's going to be a linear equation with a y-intercept of negative 12 and a slope of 3. Next, graph y equals 4x plus 5. So that'll have a y-intercept of 5 and a slope of 4. And last, we're going to enter a quadratic equation. This is something we'll do later in the year. So first, you're going to type x to get that variable x. And then you're going to hit that x squared button, and it should add the 2 exponent. And then plus 2x plus 5. So our calculator is going to be able to graph all 3 of these equations for us at once. Once we've entered them, go ahead and hit the graph button on the top right-hand side of your calculator. What you should see is something like this. You should see 2 lines and a curve. That curve represents the quadratic equation. If you don't see all 3 of these lines, or if you got an error message, there's likely something wrong in the settings in your window, and we'll address that in a minute. To adjust your view, we need to be able to change where the window is and we need to understand what the items in the window menu mean. So click on the window button, which is in that top row of gray buttons, and you should see something that says window. It'll have X-min and X-max. So if you picture the X-axis, the X-min is how far down on the X-axis you can see. The X-max is how far up you can see. The X-scale is simply how fast the increments on the X-axis go up, and the default is 1. The Y-max is -50. The Y-min is -50, and the Y-max is 50. These numbers may be different on your calculator, but I would encourage you to go ahead and change them now so that your window view has the numbers that are noted here. Please be careful when you're entering the X-min that you type in the negative sign and then the number 50, as opposed to the subtraction operation and the number 50. If you enter the X-min as the subtraction operation and then 50, you're going to get an error message. Okay, so what do these numbers mean? Well, the standard view that your calculator gives you is an X-min of 10 and an X-min of -10 and X-max of +10. So on the X-axis, we can see a width that spans from -10 to +10. And on the Y-axis, we can see from a lower bound of -10 to an upper bound of +10. So it's specifying where on the axis your calculator's window is looking. If we adjust these, we can take that standard X min and max and Y min and max. If we need to move down to see something lower on the graph, notice I've left the X min and max the same, but I've shifted the Y down. So now on the Y-axis, I'm looking at a range that goes from 0 down to -20. I could also shift it to the right. In this case, I would leave my Y min and max where they had started, and I would shift my X min and max. So now we're looking on the X-axis from 0 over to +20. I can also zoom in if I need to see more detail, so I can make the window on the calculator look at a smaller area of the graph from X-min to -5 and X-max to 5, right? I can change all of those. Or I can zoom way out. Some tips for adjusting your view. It's helpful if you start with the X min and max being plus and minus the same number. For example, a min of -50 and a max of +50. This isn't always going to be the case, but it's a good place to start out. Next, make your Y max and min be plus and minus the same number as your X max and min. So let all of your dimensions in this, your X max and min, Y max and min, be the same magnitude. Finally, if you have a graph that you're trying to find, it's helpful if you can calculate one single point on your graph. Let's say that you found out that the point 2, 3 should be on your graph. And then you can think about where do you need to set your maxes and mins to make sure that your window includes at least that one particular point. When we get to graphing quadratic equations, those are those curvy things, you'll find it's helpful to use the vertex. We'll learn more about that as the year moves on. Sometimes you'll enter an equation and you'll hit graph and it'll show that it's done graphing, but you won't actually see anything. That may be because your view of the coordinate axis doesn't happen to contain the thing you're looking for. For example, if we had our X min and max set to -10 and positive, our Y min and max set to -10 and positive, what's shown here in red, that would be the portion of the coordinate axis we're looking at. If the line we were graphing was the line in green, it wouldn't show up on our calculator's window at all. So we would need to adjust our window settings, either zoom out entirely or move our window to the left and up to be able to actually view the line that we're concerned with. If as you're going through this, you get a thing that says error, what should you do? Well, a couple of common things that you can do. One is you can make sure that your window settings are correct. Make sure that the minimum values, the X-min, is lower than the maximum values. So the X-min has to be a lower number than the X-max. Also, make sure that if you have a negative number for one of your window coordinates, that you're using the negative sign, not the subtraction sign from your calculator. There's also something called statistical plotting. On your calculator, you'll see a button that says Stat Plot. If you click that button, you want to make sure that all of the stat plots are turned off. If any of them have on highlighted, use your arrows to switch it so that they say off, because that'll mess up your graphing. If all else fails, we can reset the memory. This is something that we don't do lightly because if you've loaded any programs into your calculator, you will lose them when you do that. But during class, I can show you how to reset the memory if needed.